All right. Today I'm excited to have Hate the Game, Economic Cheat Codes for Life, Love, and Work by Dr. Daryl Fairweather. Dr. Fairweather, thank you for joining College Towns today. Exciting to meet you. We follow each other on Twitter. You have a great account there, so thanks for coming on College Towns.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
If we could start, I'd like your book's interesting in terms of, you kind of talk about your own career, your own path, your own journey. Those are things that I'm consistently writing about here, thinking about here, talking to young students. So maybe kind of what led you into your PhD and then your interest kind of in economics.
Sure. So when I was applying for college for undergrad, I thought I was going to be an engineer. I like put on all my college applications that I was going to study mechanical engineering because I liked math, I liked physics. It seemed like a good fit. I wanted to do something that was not so theoretical like physics, but had real world meaning. Uh, But then on the way to MIT, which is where I went for undergrad, my dad gave me the book for economics. I read it on the plane. And by the time I had landed in Boston, I was sure I was going to be an economist. Even though I had like taken AP econ in high school, I didn't really like understand what the power of economics was, how broad the field was. And Freakonomics was the thing that made it click for me, that it was really about people interacting with one another and the incentives that they have and how you can essentially predict human behavior if you understand people's goals, their benefits, their costs. And if you scale that way all the way up, then you can understand the entire economy. So that really was interesting to me. I loved all the math that was in it, the statistics, and then but really the focus on human interactions is what drew me in.
That's great. It's funny, Freakonomics, I read it too, probably around the same time, maybe a little bit after, and I was inspired as well. I mean, I went and got my PhD, not in economics, but just thinking more about the world and in like a scientific way. Like I wasn't very focused on academics as an undergrad, and so I can feel that kinship in terms of like, oh, this is like uh, I don't know, a gateway drug to to social science or something like that, at Freakonomics. But you were lucky. You actually got to study under the Freakonomics economist author Stephen Levitt. So I mean, can you talk about being in that space and kind of the intellectual, like what it felt like to kind of be around that kind of the University of Chicago and sort of this kind of mythical economics place.
Yeah, so I was very inspired by Freakonomics. Steve Levitt, he went to MIT for his PhD and then he became a professor at the University of Chicago. And I just basically modeled my trajectory. I was like, I'm going to go where he is since he did the kind of research that I wanted to do. I was also really getting into behavioral economics. I was in college during the foreclosure crisis. And I was actually doing undergraduate research on the foreclosure crisis at MIT and then at the Boston Fed with a behavioral economics emphasis because back then it was really controversial that economists didn't see the housing bubble coming or they weren't alerting people of it as much. I mean, there were like economists out there talking about it, Robert Schiller, for example, but uh, it wasn't like people felt like economists had failed and the behavioral economics was viewed as the reason that they failed, that regular economists didn't really understand the mistakes that home buyers were going to make. So liking behavioral economics and also just the time and the place got me into the housing market. But then I wanted to go to Chicago for Steve Levitt and also Richard Thaler, the father of behavioral economics, was at the business school. And it just felt like the ideal place for me to be to learn the kind of economics that I wanted to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that, going there, I'm sure, you have this kind of inspiring moment and you're doing this great work. And on your academic committee, you did study under both of those professors, but you tell a story in the book about that you submit your proposal, I guess, for your research, and they literally tell you like, "Hey, this is interesting, but it's never going to get published in kind of top journals." Is that when you told yourself like, okay, maybe I'm not like I'm doing this PhD, but like not going to be an academic because I think you have a quote, I want to do research that people outside the ivory tower found useful. So can you kind of talk about maybe that realization and kind of that, I mean, it's sort of a crushing moment, I think, too, potentially. I'm not sure, but if you can maybe talk about that and sort of realizing you're not going to stay in academia as a professor, at least.
Yeah, so the kind of research that I was attracted to, this kind of Freakonomics style research where there's an interesting fact and then you dig into the data and you have some theories about how it's going to play out. You do a pretty simple economic analysis, regression analysis to see if your hypothesis was correct. That was very, I mean, that was very popular in the 90s, or Steve Levitt made it really popular. But then by the time that I was in graduate school in the early 2000s, it was already on its way out. And this
Mhm.
new kind of structural economics, which is still pretty popular, was on its way in, which was more about creating complex economic models and then putting like big data, not necessarily big data, but data attached to it. I guess the difference is that economists became less interested in these kind of like aha results that are unintuitive but like interesting, the kind of things that would go in a Freakonomics book. And they became more interested in things that were hard to do technically,
Mhm.
without really the results being all that interesting to people who don't understand the technical feat that it took to get that
Right.
result. And that was just not what I was interested in. I knew that I wasn't going to be the best at that. There were people in my, graduate program who were really passionate about doing that kind of technical work. And at the same time, there were new kinds of economics happening outside of academia and tech. Like tech was this place where all this data was being created and they wanted to understand it better. And that's what I ended up going into eventually. So I think it was just like a matter. I mean, I'm sure this happens to people in their career all the time, that the thing that they wanted to do, they get into it because it's really popular and then it starts to fade in popularity right when they get their skills. Like you see this in a lot of industries, and you just have to adapt when that happens and find out, what is the next thing that I could get into earlier.
Right. I think that's a lot of young people are kind of facing that right now with some of the cuts in the various sectors. Was there a stigma when you were kind of deciding to leave? Because that, I'm an academic. I, have had colleagues that kind of have talked about that. And, you read any like our professor subreddit and like people are talking about, should I leave? Should I not leave? And, PhD programs are often geared, they put up on their webpage like this person is a professor here, and it's even called like alt arc or alt career, for academia, leaving academia. So was that, I mean, did you feel like pressured to potentially stay, or you just like, no, I'm going to go to the tech sector. That's where the exciting stuff is happening. That's where the interesting stuff is happening.
There was social pressure to stay, but the kind of social pressure that you get in academia is like about, so anybody who leaves academia is kind of seen as like essentially a failure, because the belief is that you couldn't hack it, that you weren't good
Mm.
enough to make it, and that like the best of the best are going to stay and they're going to rise to the top. So telling my professors that I was leaving, it did kind of feel like I was telling them that I was accepting failure. And I think that's like, for them, all they know is academia too. So I think that they were afraid for me. They maybe thought that I was going to go become a consultant forever, which was the first job that I took, which is like, I think some people think that consulting is a waste of intelligent people's resources. So I think that there is some of that stigma too, that like I was going to go into the private sector and do work that wasn't going to help anybody or be useful to the broader economy. So yeah, I definitely got that, I guess, disappointment
Mhm.
from professors. I remember Levitt actually asked me like, is something going on? Like, is one of my family members sick? Like, why do I need the money? Like that kind of thing. So yeah, but really I was just coming to the realization that this place was not where I was going to succeed. So yeah, it was a tough thing to deliver, but I don't know.
Sure.
You kind of have to get through it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I wish, and it seems like we're moving there with the way that the job market is, where professors are kind of realizing that. But the ones that maybe haven't been on the market in 30 years or whatnot, they're still kind of like, oh, well, just, apply and bootstrap it and this kind of thing. And, it's not, it's never that simple. Uh, one thing though that I notice in this book, and you talk about you're using it as like a teaching tool, or like people like you're teaching people about these terms and these ideas, and you're breaking it down in a way that is digestible and understanding. It almost has like a textbook quality to it in some ways, because you sort of have like the terms italicized, and at the end of the chapter, it's broken down into here's the key takeaways. At the end of the book, there's like an appendix. So was there sort of this, you get out, you go to the kind of the tech world, and then Redfin, but was there this sort of like, oh, I still want to teach, I still want to pass on the knowledge, or be kind of a teacher, when you were conceptualizing, your career, and then obviously with the book?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that when I was in graduate school, I wanted to be a professor was for the teaching part of it, not just the research part of it. I really do. I enjoy talking about economics. I enjoy teaching people who think that they don't know economics something that makes them think that they do understand economics. One of the things I learned in my first tech job was that everybody I was working with was like capable of understanding economic concepts. I just had to figure out what metaphors or what use cases they could connect to understand these concepts. And that, like, doing that over and over again was what built this muscle to communicate with people. Like, I know I can teach you basically any concept if I can just find out what are the metaphors that work for you. So yeah, I really enjoy writing. Writing is a part of my job as well, and just communicating in general. I think that that is one of the qualities that set me apart in the private sector. When you're an economist in academia, the only thing that you need to do to be successful is be a great economist. Research, publish, that's all you need to focus on. But in the private sector, it's really valuable to be an economist and something else. Sometimes that's being an economist and a software engineer, being an economist and I don't know, a financial analyst. Like, you have a second type of knowledge that you can use with your economics. And for me, it was my communication skills. And I put a lot of effort into developing them after graduate school because I saw how important it would be in the private sector. And that's kind of the niche that I started to grow in. And I didn't have like a ton of competition either. So that was a good niche to be in.
Yeah, I think sometimes academia, and not that this is a podcast bashing academia, I'm in academia, but sometimes interdisciplinary work is punished, if not just, not people aren't, it's not rewarded, as maybe what you're talking about in the private sector, where I think it seems like it's a lot highly valued there. So can we kind of get into your experience at Redfin? I think that's where we connected on Twitter. I always tweet about housing and this kind of thing, and you're great at that with numbers and things like that. So you use a lot of housing and examples. I presume from your work at Redfin in the book. So can you maybe talk a little bit about like what's your day to day? Like what exactly does an economist at Redfin do actually?
We do housing research. Me and the other economists, we try to come up with research projects and questions that are going to be relevant to people buying, selling, or renting homes, which is really a very wide audience. And then also journalists who write about the housing market, we try to communicate with them. Also, our executives and our agents at the Redfin company, we're like communicating this research to them. So yeah, a basic day is coming up with research ideas, what we can do with the data that we have, which is pretty extensive. We have all of the data that's created by the website and the app, plus all of the purchase history and county records for all the home sales and basically all the home sales in the United States. So it's just really rich data, and we're just trying to come up with new interesting questions to write about that we do that are relevant. We do really try to prioritize relevancy to the time, whether that's talking about like how tariffs might impact the supply of housing, or talking about like what mortgage rates are doing to the housing market, but also broader research about like how does the legacy of redlining still impact home prices today, just trying to get people to understand the housing market better.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I'm sure you go leaving academia and going to this place with like such rich data that's there and available, and just literally asking you to play in it. I mean, that's very exciting, and juxtaposed from us here, where we sort of it's like IRB. It's like 2 years later, we're doing this project. So that's got to be an exciting day-to-day kind of opportunity for you.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, sure, sure. If we could talk a little bit about we're about the same age. You talk about in the book graduating into kind of the recession, or you're about to graduate kind of during the recession, and some of those things impacted your thinking and obviously your career choices. And so you use that as kind of an anchor to the story, but connecting to kind of these economic terms and economic research. So, I think right now, or it's seemingly, I can't predict the future, but it seems like there might be another version of this coming, jobs being cut. It's harder for young people. Like I'm talking to I don't teach undergrads, but I interact a lot with undergrads, and I teach grad students as well. And I'm often talking about the job market and what to do. And so, you have the experience of graduating into one of these markets, plus you have all the research. So, and I know like you can't give everything away in the interview, but what is some advice to young people right now who are about to go graduate into a possible recession, or some thoughts that you have there?
Yeah, I think the economy is difficult right now. It's weirdly strong when you look at the metrics like unemployment and GDP growth, but the uncertainty is extremely high. Like there's the economic uncertainty index that looks at how much recession is being mentioned, and I think just today it got as high as it was during COVID. So, and I talk about uncertainty aversion in the book a lot, and ambiguity aversion, which is this idea that people really don't like uncertainty. If they had the option between picking like a ball out of an urn that's where they know half the balls are black versus half red, versus an urn where they don't know the mix, they would rather go with the certainty, even though the probabilities are actually the same. When you know nothing, it's still 50-50, but like people will go for the situation where more information is known, even when that information is not useful to them. So I think what the advice I would give to people is to try to embrace uncertainty as much as you can, to not be afraid of it. I think that because there's so much uncertainty with the way the economy is going, but also with AI and what jobs could be created, you should probably listen to yourself more than anything else. Like follow your own passions, develop your skills, and have some faith that if you develop your skills, those skills are going to be useful to you in the future. I never could have imagined being a chief economist because when I started studying economics, that role didn't really exist. So I think that we're like, I don't know what careers are going to be most in demand, but I know that having skills, especially ones that can't be done by an AI, like judgment, for example, is something that you should develop because it's going to be useful.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Another part of the subtitle you have is love, and you kind of talk about your own experience, and this is something that I think it's just such a common topic on social media. Even yesterday, I was watching a viral video of kind of a woman going through the dating apps and kind of like hitting X. She'd like tap on the screen. Oh, I don't like this X on that X on that. I was just thinking like, wow, like I got married right before the app craze got really popular. And so I'm like, I think I got the last lifeboat on the Titanic. Like it
Yeah.
seems very difficult right now for people in the dating market, and just being a young person trying to navigate this, or I guess any person really trying to navigate this. So can you walk me through kind of the importance, I think, of you talk about finding a partner and making decisions and this kind of thing. Can you maybe give us a little word on that part of the book?
Yeah, so in the book, I kind of break down all the different economic reasons for marriage, or the different economic factors that go into marriage. There's a lot of research from Gary Becker or modeling about the economics of marriage, how there's a production aspect to it. You know, you're producing household productivity. Sorry, that's a weird way to say it. You produce children for one, you like do dishes together, you invest together, you make decisions together. So in like a way, family is like a firm. I think Emily Oster has a book about this. But there's a lot of research about like things that could be more likely to lead to divorce. One interesting piece of research shows that when two married people have correlated incomes, they're more likely to get divorced than when their incomes are negatively correlated. And
Interesting.
the reason why is that when you have like a negative shock and you're highly correlated, you're going to be in a worse situation than if you're negatively correlated. The example I use is a real estate agent who specializes in luxury housing and a real estate agent who specializes in foreclosures.
Mhm.
In that situation, assuming that homes are being sold, they'll both types of agents will be doing, or one of the agents will be doing well no matter whether the economy, whether the housing market is up or down. So that income within a couple would be more stable than if they were both luxury agents and their income is really good when the housing market is good, but really bad when the housing market is bad. So it seems like kind of heartless to consider something like that, but I think knowing that can help you plan. If you do decide to marry somebody in the same exact industry as you, maybe try to work on slightly different areas that aren't so correlated, or save more so that when you're both experiencing a negative shock, you have more in savings so you can ride that out a bit better. But yeah, there are a bunch of examples I talk about within marriage. I'm not sure which one to
No,
go
that
with,
was
but that was
no, that
one.
was yeah, absolutely. That's great. Like I said, you got to go read the book, but we can at least get a little taste of it now. Another interesting aspect that you talked about that I'm always thinking about is the commute. And people seem to it really drives people crazy, I think, and it drives, that's kind of I guess the key point there. It can really grate, a long commute, and they kind of a lot of their decisions are, oh, I don't want this house to be built or whatever to be built because it'll, ruin my commute or it'll be longer. You talk about how you were able to go remote during kind of COVID, and it just saved kind of so much time, and it helped you make decisions about where to live. So, can you talk about the importance of a commute and how it kind of affects us, and how having a choice maybe can lead to some positive outcomes?
Yeah, for me personally, I feel like there is a extremely high correlation between how long my commute is and how miserable I am.
Yes.
Because like my first job, I had the worst commute. It was in San Diego, and the traffic was just terrible, especially right at rush hour. It was, and I would have to drive because there was no public transit. Once I got to Seattle, like I started taking the bus to work, and that was so much better because I could work on the bus and then leave the office a little bit earlier. Or I could listen to podcasts or read or something at least. And then working remote was like the pinnacle because now I don't have a commute at all. Yeah, I think people will kind of maybe don't appreciate how costly commutes are because you're just literally taking time out of your day. But also, that cost is not just for you, it's for the entire economy. Like so much productive time is lost to traffic. And if we had better transit and better housing policy, we could have a more efficient economy and people's lives would be better off, at least if they hate commutes as much as I do.
hmm Yeah, I had that same experience. I changed jobs but didn't move, and so I was living a lot further away. And I'm in Southern California as well,
Yeah.
not too far from San Diego, a little north. And my mood was just awful when I had to commute and sit in traffic. Whereas now I moved closer, it's like a 10-minute drive. Or I could even bike sometimes, and it's
Nice.
just I feel so much better all the time.
Yeah, yeah, but I talk about like the commuting paradox in the book,
Mm,
how when people's incomes go up, they don't actually move, they don't actually reduce their commutes because
mm.
like it's even more valuable to them to get to the office. It's a little bit unintuitive, but yeah, people endure these commutes. When people buy homes, they'll oftentimes trade off a longer commute for a bigger home,
Right.
which I think is just an underappreciation of how much commutes can impact you negatively.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I couldn't get, the chief economist from Redfin without asking about homes and buying a home. And especially maybe for a young person, I keep seeing there's sort of a doomerism about home owning, I think, in the US and really kind of all of the Anglo countries who just haven't built as many houses over the past couple decades. What advice do you have, or do you have advice on buying a home, or what kind of market, or what to think about? That's a huge question, but is there any nuggets in the book that can help someone alleviate kind of the concern or consternation that maybe this entire generation has?
What my The general advice I have is that you shouldn't worry about buying a home until you are ready to commit to staying in that
Mhm.
home for around 5 years is a good rule of thumb because the transaction cost of buying homes is high. You have to pay your real estate agents, you have to pay taxes. So if you're not ready to like really lay down roots, and you're probably not ready to buy a home. That was my mistake that I made, that I bought a home before I was really committed to staying there long term. I ended up selling it at a slight loss, but all's well that ends well, because I got to a better place in my career. And I think that's also something that people underappreciate, is that if you can't afford to buy a home, the answer is not necessarily that you need to limit your budget or you need to like sacrifice something. Sometimes the answer is that you need to figure out a way to earn more money so that you can buy that home. And there's a trade-off there, because the cities that have the best job opportunities also have some of the highest housing
Mm.
costs. So I think if you're at a stage in your life where you're just trying to focus on increasing your earnings, then you should not feel bad about falling behind on home ownership, because you're probably living in a place where it is extremely unaffordable to buy a home. But then once you earn enough money, it won't be as challenging, or you might be in a place in your career where you can work remotely and then go buy a home somewhere more affordable. But I think renting is becoming more and more common now. I think we're starting to lose our attachment to the American dream. So if you are buying a home later, you're really just part of that overall trend. Now, housing policy obviously is like to blame, and if you are upset that you can't buy a home, then may I suggest YIMBYism as as something that you could put some time into, or learn more about, because yeah, it's really not any one person's fault. It's a failure of policy.
Sure. And I think that is driving a lot of people into those movements. Those are really fast growing, and it's an interesting space to watch, certainly. We're kind of coming to the end of the interview, and it's been great. Do you have any kind of final words, final thoughts? Like what do you want people to take away? What's like a pitch to go read this book, buy this book, for the audience?
Yeah, well, one of the themes in the book is that the economy is unfair, but you should still try to win, because you can win if you just understand how the economy works. I think that is like the overall pitch for learning economics in general, is that if you understand the economy, you'll be able to navigate it better. I think a lot of young people, when they start learning about economics, the first thing they understand is the failures of capitalism. And capitalism does have a lot of failures, but it also creates a lot of opportunities. And I think the best feature of our economy is that you have choice, that there are millions of games in the economy that you could be playing. So I think just going into the economy, or industry with its attitude that you will find the thing that you are best at, can help you, because it means that you're not going to get stuck in opportunities or in places where you're limiting yourself. I think just you got to keep trying, you got to keep playing new games, and have confidence that if you're building skills, you will get to the place that will feel like success for you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, the book is Hate the Game by Dr. Daryl Fairweather. Thank you for joining College Town. This has been great.
Thank you for having me.